In this part of video, we would discuss the different themes of the story Gorilla in the Guest Room. The first theme, I believe that every activity that threatens the well being of animals, be it rare or the common animals, must be challenged. And we collectively, when I say collectively, I believe it includes the government, the NGOs, and even our culture, because it plays a very major role when it comes to this noble cause like animal conservation. And collectively we need to combat, we need to fight this threat, this menace of animal cruelty. We can just not overlook at the crimes that inflict great pain on these helpless animals. And the worst part is there is in fact nobody to speak for them, and it is through Gerald's short story that throws light on these inhuman treatment meted out to animals. Gerald believes that these zoos do not work towards the conservation of wildlife, but they act as a mere showplace of animals. In fact, they don't even provide better conditions for these animals to live healthily. And if we look at most zoo enclosures, they are very, very small and quite different from the natural habitat of animals, which are very much unlike Gerald's zoo. We move on to the next theme of our story, conservation of wildlife. But before I begin, let me tell you something about Daryl's life. Uh, Daryl called himself a champion of the small uglies, and I believe this happens to be his advocacy, or I would say, support for wildlife conservation. And I don't think we should disagree to this title. He took to writing books in order to support this, in fact, noble cause of conservation. And this efforts has given us as readers some wonderful collection worth reading. So, conservation of wildlife. Now, let me discuss what is it. It's a practice of protecting wild plants and animal species and their habitats. The goal of wildlife conservation is to ensure that nature will be around for future generations to enjoy, and also to recognize the importance of wildlife for humans. I believe it was a very genuine effort at Gerald's part to establish his zoo as a place that must cease to be a mere showplace of animals and to start to contribute something towards the conservation of wildlife. I really appreciate the genuineness with which Daryl presents the case for wildlife conservation. And of course, we should not forget the ease with which he adds the humor, which makes this story a delightful dose of infotainment. Gerald's lifelong excursions and his expeditions to different parts of the world had no doubt made him a famous wildlife conservationist, and this is nothing but his love for animals. Moreover, it is just not an imaginative story, but a very semi autobiographical naturalist account which proves his love for animals. This special bond between animals and humans is beautifully depicted in this story. Pointless to say, Darrell, as a conservator of wildlife, knows that the animals kept in his zoo require much support and assistance from him. He is somebody who is alert to the needs for wildlife conservation. Darrell's writing is more a kind of empathetic treatment that he gives to these two gorillas, and it is this style of his writing that makes this story appealing to the readers. Although these two gorillas are just the representation of all the endangered species, what is interesting is that Pongo isn't shown just a specimen, but his treatment is more like an individual, and this shows Daryl's love for animals. We move on to the next theme, trust. From dominating humans to caring humans. As humans, we have played different roles, and in this story, Gorilla in the Guest Room, which is narrated in first person, the author explores the theme of trust beautifully as expressed by the wonderful bond between the gorilla and the human. The story features two gorillas, Pongo and Nendi. Pongo was brought by the author when he was just a baby, and so he grew up around humans, and so Pongo had no trust issues with humans. However, the other gorilla, that is Nendi, had a different case altogether. She is rigid in her trust areas, very slow in trusting humans. And this very behavior of Nandi is justified because of her past. And very interestingly, the author uses the reference of Nandi's scar in her character description, which takes us to her horrible past and her ill treatment by humans. She has gone through immense pain and suffering, and this trauma makes Nandi incapable of trusting humans. And the scar very intelligently highlights the readers to the unlucky, unpleasant past of Nendi, and this description of the suffering faced by this gorilla and her subsequent behavior is an example of the trauma which animals suffer from irresponsible and unnecessary human involvement in the lives of wild animals. The author and the other zookeepers had to work a lot initially to win Nandi's confidence. Fortunately for Nandi, she doesn't need to fear Daryl. All that Daryl wanted was Nandi's welfare, and this can be seen by how he treats Nandi throughout the story. There is no real need for Nandi to distrust Daryl. Fear is a psychological construct, and we, as humans, I believe we happen to be the most top predators of many wildlife species, and our very mere presence can create a landscape of fear. And this is very much evident when it comes to Nandi's fear and her antisocial behavior. So, the major source of fear, I believe, is that of Nandi, and this happens to be her psychological construct which resulted out of her past experience. Nandi tends to be more aggressive and defensive, not trusting anyone, especially when she is surrounded by strangers, is a classic example of this fear and distrust. Although I could go to an extent to say that scientists would deny that animals do have these emotions like fear or panic or distress or rage. Um, but Darrell very beautifully portrays this aspect in his writing and gives us a wonderful story worth reading. Similarly, when we talk about fear, we see fear also expressed when author finds out that Pongo was ill. He becomes anxious and Daryl is worried about Pongo, not knowing what is happening with him. He feels he is responsible for all the animals in his zoo and their welfare. He took extra care and made sure that Pongo is brought back to a better and healthy stage. The author and Pongo had developed a special bond, and just as a parent would go to an extreme to treat their ailing child, we see in this story Darrell and his wife do everything that was possible to cure the ailing gorilla. The next theme, connection. Dependency of animals on the animal care staff for their daily needs leads to a very special relationship that we see in this story. The author ensures the well being of the animals in his zoo. This bond, this connection between the two, or this relationship that we explore in this story between the author and the two gorillas is so positive that it confers emotional well being to both the author and the gorillas. Darrell's concern for Pongo's health put the author into an extreme difficult situation to choose as to whether he should be going to France or should he cancel it. He was very close to canceling his trip, but before he leaves for France by the end of the story, we see that he makes it sure that the situation was completely under control and Pongo was now safe and out of danger. Mostly, we don't come across a veterinarian or a zookeeper for that matter who would be so much involved in the lives of animals that they are associated with. But in this story, there is this special connection that the author feels for these two gorillas. And it is so much evident in this story in number of ways. As a naturalist, Durrell promoted good health to his animals in his zoo. And this, I believe, is a mark of a good wildlife conservationist who is not only concerned about diagnosing or treating or caring his animals when they fall ill, but Durrell also exhibits the ability to show understanding and somebody who is very compassionate. Territorial issues. Territoriality is something very common throughout the animal kingdom. Animals protect their territory from incursions by others. Similarly, we come across this brief episode in the story where the two gorillas are put together in the same cage. Initially, however, we do find the rift between the two gorillas with aggressive behavior. Yes, I believe that it was very important for Pongo on Nandy's arrival, who tries to control her, or at least Pongo and makes it sure that she should be aware that he's the one who was the charge of this cage. But later in this story, we also see very sober behavior of acceptance by these two gorillas. Maybe through this territorial issues, which is depicted in a very, light, humorous manner. Author Durrell might be hinting at the innate desire of men to control women in general. He might also be suggesting the inequality between men and women through this animal behavior. Although it is in a very subtle way, we do experience this side of the story as well. We move on to the last theme, freedom. Though both Pongo and Nendi are in captivity, they still have freedom that they may not have had experience had they lived in the wild. Should they live in the wild, they may very well be killed by probably hunters or poachers or wild animals, who knows. Yes, they are saved from all these circumstances by Durrell, and this I believe is a blessing in disguise for these animals like gorillas. The gorillas are in the best of the place that they can be. The two gorillas bring immense joy in the life of Durrell, and the fact that he cares for them despite keeping them in captivity is outstanding. Durrell's treatment of these two gorillas, right from buying them to providing a mate to breed, to caring and understanding them when in need, should be acknowledged. And he makes sure that every possible thing is provided to give these animals. We can call it a different kind of freedom in spite of their captivity. This is worth consideration.